Hello, board gamers of the world. Welcome to the Curious Box. This is a new season of videos, as you know, and we are going to start also a new season of interviews with game designers, with game publishers, with illustrators, graphic designers, and so on and so on. People that will give you some very interesting visions of how to make board games. So if you are creating your games, if you are publishing your games, pay attention. This is going to be very interesting. Today we start with Mr. Ole Steiness, who designed the incredible Champions of Midgard. So stay tuned because this is going to be a good one. Hi, Ola.
Hello.
I'm trying to pronounce your name still. Welcome to the Curious Box.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with the question I always ask, and this is, how did this interest in board games begin? It's from childhood. It came later.
Yeah, I guess I've always had the interest because ever since I was a kid, I have played games and I've tried to make my own versions of it. Of course, only as for fun, right? When I was a kid, and then I got my first computer. It was a Commodore 64, and then I did a bit of programming on that. Did some text-based adventures, and I got hooked on computer games. And then it wasn't until actually I met my wife like 13 or 14 years ago when I got back into board gaming and realized, wow, a lot have happened on the board game front. So I got hooked again on playing games with her and got hooked on new Euro games and of course the advanced Ameritrash games. So yeah, and then I continued designing games because, well, it's in my blood. I also do computer games, so yeah, I cannot not design, I guess, whether it's for computers or board games.
Always creating.
Always creating, yes.
um, you talked about Euro games and the Ameritrash? Do you have any favorites?
Oh, for recent ones, I like, well, they're not that recent, but I like Eric Lang's games, especially the Chaos in the Old World, because he mixed that. Of course, he has the asymmetric combat, but he also have the unique skills and the upgrades and the influence markers. That's a great thing in a Dudes on a Map game, that you have these small influence markers that you place. So it's not actually about the combat. The combat is usually just a means to go to be able to do these influence and actually take over territories. So that's a favorite of mine. But I really like thematic games in general. It doesn't have to be dice rolling games, but I like that there's a story behind it. So you have something to talk over afterwards.
How do
For
you?
instance,
Yeah, yes. Please go on.
I like games like Ticket to Ride, but I don't play them with my friends because there's no story afterwards. I don't. It's a very well designed game, and I love to play it with my family. But we don't say, "Hey, remember when you were building a route to Berlin and I blocked you?" It's not as interesting as saying how you defeated Cthulhu's henchmen right before the gate opened or something like that. So that's why I prefer the thematic ones.
So you like to use games as storytellers,
Yes.
creating moments and telling stories. That's also how I like to use games mostly, but it's not always possible. Uh, when you started creating board games, what made you start creating board games? What was that click? That, I mean, you like board games. I mean, you like video games. You create video games, so it's almost natural, or not?
For me, I've always, even when I was a kid, when I saw a good movie or anything, I wanted to interact more. I wanted to play it out myself, whether it was sculpting or writing a novel or directing a movie. It turned out the gaming was probably the easier way to go, and what applied or appealed to me. So so that was why I did it, because if I watched Star Wars or something like that as a kid, I wanted to be part of that universe, but not only as a viewer. I wanted to participate in actually creating the worlds, and games let me do that. So, and I still have that feeling. It's not enough for me. It's just I love watching movies, of course, and playing games, but I also enjoy just as much creating them and making universes for other people.
And your first game was?
Well, well, the first published game was Police Precinct by
No,
a
no, no.
company named Games.
The first game you designed, the first game you designed, not. It doesn't need to be to have been published.
Oh, I've done it all my life. So I remember I did some for Commodore 64 based on Jurassic Park when the first one was just released. So that has to be what, 91 or something like that. And before that, I did a board game implementation of uh, there was Aliens and Transformers, all these sci-fi IPs. Always loved sci-fi, still do. So I did some versions of that, which was basically, I think it was inspired by Games Workshop. Uh,
Mhm.
so you can
Yeah.
also see I have the old Space Hulk still
Yeah.
lingering up there, the first edition, I think at least. So I made kind of like reskinned versions of Doom and Alien, Star Wars, and
You still have
Predator.
those?
No, I don't. I don't.
Do you ever go back and play your old games?
Yeah, well, it happens, but usually already have always have like 15 or 20 games I'm working on. So I always have like feel guilty if I'm not working on those. Right, I want to finish them, get them out. So
You said 15 to 20 games.
yeah, at least.
Board games
Yeah,
or only board games?
yeah, that's just board games. Yeah, I have a couple of computer games as well.
Okay,
That's
okay,
also
okay.
why.
I'm curious now because yeah, because this is this is something a lot of people talk about. And when I interviewed Bruno Catala, for example, he showed me all these prototypes, and there were 13 he was working on. And I was very, very surprised because most of the game designers I know, uh, they cannot work in more than two, three, four, maybe. Tell me how do you manage to work in so many games at the same time?
I keep a mess at my office. I think that's how I do it. Um, it I think there's like a sweet spot, like 3 or 4 this games, because then you don't grow tired or go in loops when you just do the same again, again, and again. But also, like people say, ideas are cheap. So when I get a new idea, I just flesh it out. Actually have some examples right here at my desk. I just scribble down whatever I get. Whenever if you can see, whenever I had ideas, I just put it on a small piece of paper,
Okay.
and it goes into my collection. And I write down notes on the computer and flesh something out in Photoshop, and then it's there but it's not done, so I go back to it, and that means my file list is growing and growing, because whenever I get inspiration for a game, I mean, I have to write it down, and I get all enthusiastic about it, right?
Do you ever, I mean, how many ideas like this, how many single sheets of paper do you have on your drawer?
Well, I have a mess on my desk right now, but I usually I write them down in my folder, uh, and then I get off it. Let's see. I can just see my folder here. It has uh, the games ideas where I have enough to flesh out to actually put into a folder. I have 193 uh, folders, and of course, 3 of them are published. So that's still 190. Still needs to go.
And 15 you're working on them, so it's 175.
Yeah,
Let-
something like that. Yeah. Of course,
oh,
some of them are not good ideas, but sometimes I go back and say this was a nice theme, but I need to alter the mechanics, or the other way around. Like this has great mechanics, but I don't want to do another zombie game or whatever. Um, and then I just borrow here and there and change stuff up. So, and I have like something just very old that's just lingering about that I never get to finish, but I want to finish it because it was nice when I started and it was promising. And yeah, it's just staying around. So, killing my babies, that's a challenge always, right?
so your first game was Police Precint, your first
Uh,
published game?
yes, yes. Board game at least.
Yes.
And then a couple of years after that, Spurs, A Tale
Mhm.
in the Old West came
Yeah.
from Mr. B Games. And then, of course, Champions of Midgard. So it's all American based, but I think it's more by accident because I go to Essen Spiel to talk to publishers. That's like my annual trip. It should have been my 10th year anniversary this year, but it's not gonna happen, unfortunately, as you probably know,
Yeah, I know.
due to the pandemic. But yeah, I always go there, and then I make arrangement with meeting with the publishers to pitch some games for them. And well, of course, the nationality isn't what's important. It's important if I think they have the style of games that I wanna that I have to show them, or even the theme. It's hard, of course, because you don't want to do a game that they're already doing, but you're trying to kind of suss out by looking at their portfolio if this would be something in their area, like do they even do thematic games, or do they only do card games, do they only do party games, do they not do children games and stuff like that. And sometimes I get it wrong anyway and bring a combat game to a Blue Orange Games, for instance. Last time I talked with them, they didn't want to do a combat game. They didn't want it fantasy and swords, and then I had a fantasy game with swords. So that was a short meeting, but that's fine. I mean, that's why you book more than one meeting, right? So, but I have more that coming out also from European publishers. So
Okay, we'll
that's
get there. We'll
exciting.
get there. Wait.
Okay, I'm talking
um,
too much.
how many? How long did it take from the beginning, from the idea, until you had a police precinct, until you thought it was time to take it to publishers?
Uh, Police precinct, probably 1 or 2 years, I think. Well, like I said, I don't work on it full time. It could be shorter then, but usually it takes a couple of years from I jolt down the first idea to it actually goes to the publisher. Um,
And you took it to Essen.
yes, I did that. So
And
talk to some
how did it
contacts.
go? I mean, what were do you remember? I mean, it was probably a long time ago. Um, it was a long time ago. It was 7 years ago at least, or eight. Do you remember what were your biggest concerns before
uh,
presenting it?
well, I've established contact with some people already over the internet. Uh, and I talked to my friend Sean Brown from It's B Games. Actually, he was the one who referred me. We had been talking about doing a firefighting game, and then Flashpoint Fire Rescue came out, and that was
Yes.
very close in style to the dungeon crawler firefighter game I was working on. But then, in the meantime, I had invented this police game, also inspired a bit by actually. Pandemic, but also Battlestar Galactica with the hidden trader mechanics and the defeating the growing fleet, or in Pandemic the growing viruses pandemic. Uh, so I did a version, and I thought, why not do that as a cop game, because there wasn't enough cop games. There was detective games, but not enough where you could actually also like drive around catching robbers on a police map or a city map, right? Um, so we already talked about that before I went to Essen. Um, but Sean couldn't help me at that moment. But he knew he had a friend in Colorado, Carl Fenner, who was starting up Common Man Games. So he referred me to him, and he was willing to take it on. So that was very nice. So, but my fears, did I have any fear? Of course, you have the fear of rejection. I mean, every publisher has that, and I still have that, right? You want the publishers to say, great, I'll take your design. But it's always hard because I guess it's like with books, you don't know exactly what they're looking for. So you try to make it as good as possible before you arrive and pitch your game.
Perfect. What um, what was the difference between eh, after you published the first game, of course, when you went to present your second game, did the publishers receive you differently?
Well, my second game, well, that was actually Sean again from Mr. B Game, so we knew each other already.
Right.
So in that way, he didn't. um, and for my third game, Tom Vassell from the Dice Tower actually helped me. He was very nice because I went to Essen and showed Champions of Midgard to a couple of publishers, and they didn't like the hybrid of because it really is a hybrid game, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I just thought out of the blue, I met Tom Vassell a few good times. I knew he liked the Police Precinct. I just wrote him and said, I have this game that, and I had a video for it. I made a pitch where I showed it. Do you think it's too soon to go to the market with a hybrid game like this, where worker placement meets dice rolling? And then he wrote back to me, I think I have a publisher for you. So that was quite a surprise, actually. So thank you, Tom. That was very nice of him. So
Do you think it would be easier today to? I mean, you got lucky, of course, um, but do you think it would be the market is now more open to hybrid games than it was then?
oh yes, I think the market is very open to all kinds of games now because we're seeing so much variety and publishers are struggling to get some new stuff to get people's attention because I also think the market is getting more saturated and a lot of games are coming out, right? You also hear publishers talking about that also on podcasts, right? There's so many games, so it's easier if you bring something new, of course. But it's easier to do stuff because there's so much available out there, tools and references and networks and Kickstarter and all this. But of course, the competition is more stiff now. So that's the downside of it, right? Uh, you're not getting anywhere with a mediocre design as a new designer. You really have to push through, I think. So.
What changed after Champions of Midgard? I mean, I'm asking, of course, about this because this is a game everybody knows, or at least everybody heard about. What changed after that?
Oh well, what changed? I earned some money on it, not enough to make a living, but well, of course, it helps with your self-esteem. So you just keep on. You are motivated to do more. It's very nice to see your game doing so well on Board Game Geek and go on all these different shows. Um,
But do
but it,
do do publishers come to you, for example, now?
yeah, but
Um,
not much actually. I think. They expect us to come with games when we are ready. But there has been a few, but it's not crazy.
okay.
I'm not that famous.
Okay. Champions of Midgard is what is now 5 years old.
Yes.
Yeah, 5 years old.
Uh,
Um, in a time when there were not so many hybrid games, because as you said, they were not so well seen in the market. Uh, how was the process of making Champions of Midgard? Did you intend it to be um, a hybrid game even when you started it, or when did it come to you, the idea of making it, and how did it change during the process of making it?
Yes, well, yeah, it was intended to be a hybrid game to start with, even though I probably didn't call it that, because my inspirations were games like um, Agricola and Stone Age and Lords of Waterdeep and all these thematic worker placement games. I love playing them, but I also like action, right? I like action games. I mentioned like before, like Terminator and Aliens, and grew up with all these '80s movies, and I wanted to have kind of that tactile feel in my game, and you don't get that in a traditional worker placement game, right? As much as I love Lords of Waterdeep, we all agree probably that the combat isn't really about combat, right? It's just paying up some resources, and then you get the quest card, and that's fine. It's a good game, but I wanted I wanted that stand up moment, as some people would call it, right? The randomness. It felt more epic to go into combat and not knowing the exact output.
Yeah.
So that was part of the
I
design from
think
the very
personally,
beginning.
I think it's one of the it's one thing that works very well, because I personally don't want to go into a combat in a game and knowing exactly that I'm going to win or knowing exactly that I'm going to lose previously. So I think it works perfectly.
Yeah, I think you need uncertainty. At least for me, if there's combat, there has to be uncertainty. Of course, you can affect it by bringing more dice and more reroll counters and whatnot, and it should be like that. And of course, with the Valhalla expansion, you can do even more of that if you don't like bad die rolls. But yeah, I think combat should have this uncertainty, because then you can feel like extra cool when it succeeds.
And that's
So
that. Yeah, it makes a great contrast uh, in this kind of game where you are preparing everything and then there is some randomness, just like this.
yeah.
um, how did you approach the publisher?
Well, as I said, I had Tom Vassell to help me out actually.
Yeah.
But that video pitch I made, I think that was a very nice way of showing off the game, because I could give them a brief overview of how it looks and plays. But other than that, I always make a one pager, a pitch, a sell sheet where I summarize the game, its mechanics, and show off its components, have a screenshot or two, and tell them who it's for, how long it plays, how complex it is. Um, so that I think that's always a good thing to do, because you can send that upfront to the publisher, and then they can review if this is something for them or not.
Do you remember how long was the video?
On about 7 minutes or something, probably a bit too long. But you can just stop it as you watch it, right? So
No, no, but that's an interesting point, because I've seen many longer videos, longer pitch videos,
uh,
and I came to realize it's a mistake. So 7 minutes, I think it's the right amount of time actually to for a pitching video. But okay, so you have Tom Vassell, you have a video, and then Tom Vassell recommending you to someone. That was enough to sell your
yeah,
game.
yeah, I think, but yeah, but there are several steps, because you have the pitch and the video, and maybe you have a meeting, and then they need to see the prototype, and then you'll go back and forth over the prototype. So, and this was also the case here, and but I think that's also how I approach publishers with new designs, right? I don't have Tom Bastel to help me each time.
Yeah.
That would be cheating and a bit too lucky. Um, but yeah, I do the sell sheet and send it to them and ask for a meeting usually, right? Because I like to go to a meeting and then I can pitch the game there. That's kind of the same as sending them a video, right? Because now I'm there, I pull out the prototype and show it to them, and then if they like it, they usually get a copy of the prototype with them back home and test it with the rules, or they ask me to send it to them, and I'll do that. And then yeah, they get back to me and tell me if I should change something or if they didn't like it. Or,
But since they accepted the prototype, um, did they change it much, or the game changed a lot since the moment when you and the publisher agreed to go on with it until the final product?
um, I don't think it changed much. Of course, visually it changed quite a lot. It's a very beautiful finished product, I think, and that's totally out of my hands. I'm not an artist, but they did a very nice layout and artwork for it. But the mechanics, well, there was some small changes and one medium, which is the blame system for the troll. You get blame if you don't defeat the troll. That's uh, that's because of Josh from Grey Fox Games. He came up with that mechanic, and I'm grateful for that because when I made the troll, I had it actually as a round-based system where it attacked different places in the city, and you just had to attack it to stop it from destroying the worker placement spots. Um, but it was not as cool. So them coming up with the blame mechanic is very nice. So, but other than that, it's pretty faithful to the original idea.
When did you realize? I mean, we are talking about a game which is 7.8 on Board Game Geek, which is a lot, and it has 12,000 ratings at least. Okay, so when did you realize? When was the moment that you realized? And it's actually 92 on the rank. I'm seeing that now. When did you realize this was becoming this big?
Well, I guess one peak was when Will Wheaton brought it on his tabletop show. If you're familiar with that, is it just called Tabletop Games? I think so. With Geek and Sundry, that spiked quite a lot, and that was not so long after publishing. But actually, when it was first published, it was published at or released. Sorry, it was released at Gen Con, and I wasn't at Gen Con. I've never been, but I had some Danish board game friends, uh, designers, actually also publishing through Grey Fox Games, and they got back to me and said, "Dude, you got to see this. It's crazy." And they showed me pictures of these already long lines waiting up, these big queues to buy the game. So that was already crazy because that was just before it was out there. So, or when it was just released. So we knew we had something going on at that point. And Grey Fox already had a hunch about this. They knew, or they were counting on this to be one of their bigger games. So I'm glad they were right. And as a side note, I have to say it was a pleasure working with them. They're pretty cool. I think they did a great job with the prototype and were very enthusiastic and friendly working with them, professional. So
There are many Danish, very well-known designers. We are talking about you and Casper Lab with Magic Maze, and also Daniel and Asger from Flamme Rouge, and also Alan Kirkby from Itchy Monkey. How do you explain this? Is there a is there a secret?
um, I think the secret is that we are like, of course, we're a small country and we are relying on creativity. So and we probably all get inspired by Lego and stuff like that. It's in the vein. I mean, we yeah, and I think we have of course the the social system that allows us to be creative. So maybe it's part of that. I don't know. But
How do you, how
yeah,
do
we have.
how do you organize? I mean, is there a community, a strong game community in Denmark?
Yes, it's growing all the time. I mean, some of the earliest Danish designers, they didn't have that. I think the first and most known Danish designer is actually Christian Petersen, who formed Fantasy Flight Game.
Yeah,
I think he's our most famous one, and nobody probably knows that he was Danish. And then is he called Christian Markusen? I don't know him in person, and I might be getting his name wrong, but who did Merchant and Marauders and
yeah.
Clash of Cultures. Um, but since then, the community have grown, and I live near Copenhagen, so I go there and meet other designers. And so that's funny because I know Kasper Lapp and Daniel and Esker and Jakob Jesgaard with Fog of Love and all this. We meet up and test each other's prototypes, right, and give feedback. And it's
So
a
you
nice
you
way of
have quality feedback.
yes. Well, of course, you get the feedback from designers, so um, they of course look at it like really like doctors reviewing other doctors' work, right? So it's harsh but constructive. So that's very nice because they can put words on exactly where what the problem is usually. Um, I will recommend some kind of test community to any designer. You cannot go out there and not have your game tested thoroughly. And if you have fellow designers to test it with, it's even better. And so everybody should reach out to their community and find other people who want to have their prototypes tested because we help each other this way. And so I give feedback and I receive feedback and we play each other's games. And nobody is stealing ideas from each other if anybody is afraid of that, because we're all too self-absorbed. So we have our own ideas, right? And we run with our own ideas. So you shouldn't be afraid of the stealing part. Uh, but some people, I'm saying this because some people are keeping their games very closed, and the upside of testing with other people definitely outweighs this very small risk. If it's probably a non-existent risk that somebody would steal your idea. And even if you test it with other people, that's actually a way of showing that this is your design and you came up with it first. You get witnesses. So I hope new designers will do that, because I've seen designers come to us in the board game community pretty late, and their game has been like going off in a wrong direction. It's pretty obvious to see it has some obvious flaws, um, while the ones that have been in the community for a while has been testing and learning from each other for a longer time. So it's a good thing.
What do you think is the one or two mistakes that first-time designers generally make?
Um, well, too much content, right? Too many details is one you see pretty often. That you fix stuff by adding features, so the game becomes very, very cluttered. Instead of removing stuff, you add stuff. That's something you see a lot. And like I said, not testing enough. And of course, deciphering in the test results you get is also a skill in itself. Some people used to say that you should listen to what people say the problem is, but not their solutions necessarily. I think that's true. Of course, you can take advice, but try to find out what's wrong, if there are problems in your game, and then see if you can come up with a solution for that problem. Write down the problem, not there's a solution right here and now. I think so. Not enough testing. That's a big one, and adding too much, especially before you test it, is also a big problem.
How many tests did you do, for example, for Champions of Midgard?
Oh,
You know?
I don't know. It's not crazy. I think it's like 20, 30 test sessions or something like that. So we play a session, I get feedback, I go back and alter it a bit, and we play again, and then with different test groups. And then, of course, the publishers get their hands on it, and they do more testing. And
Of course.
so I would love to say like, hey, I did this 500 times, but I don't have time to do that. I mean,
Yeah, still it surprises me to see only 20 or 30 tests. I would think I would think of some more. How many how many times did you test police presence?
yeah, well, maybe it's like 40 or 50 times. Maybe
Okay.
it's the same for Gems and Midgard, because I'm not counting like the very first versions. I actually have a picture of the prototype here. If you want me to share screen, if you want to see the first version,
Yeah, please.
I can do that. Let's see if it. Oh no, I can't do that because
You
you're
need
in the
permissions.
host. Yeah, yeah.
Can let me see if I know how to do that. And then I'll cut this part from the video. Where are the definitions, the configurations?
No, it's not.
I
It's
think
not.
it's here. I think it's here. No, because we were discussing about this a few days ago, me and my friends.
Ah,
So it should be around here. Atalhos, sharing screen. Estás com maximizar, silenciar. Okay, try now. Oops. Oh,
no.
still not. And last try. Sharing screen. No, I can't. I don't know how to do it.
No, it's okay. You can. Uh, but um, but anyway, not all my tests only took like 40 or 30 playthroughs. I mean, I've been working on some of my recent games. I had some problems with, so I played them like 80 or 100 times at least, probably more. And going in circles, I hate when that happens. But sometimes you go back and forth between different design solutions. So I was lucky with Gems and Midgard that I had it pretty much fleshed out pretty early on, actually. But of course, it's not always like that. Um, but it feels
Let,
good when it works.
of course. Let's go a little bit back to your background as a video game designer. Um, do you find similarities between video game designer and video game design and board game design, or those are two completely different processes?
There are some of the same challenges with onboarding and learning the game and getting into getting to the fun fast, so to speak. So in both cases, you really want to optimize what you're doing and not bore the player. So I think there are some similarities, and of course, if you're doing like a dungeon crawler or something like that, there's definitely similarities to these third-person action games. That's also what I kind of did when I did the firefighter game. I took some inspiration for third-person action games to see what hazards you would come over. Um, so there are some similarities certainly, and the process as well, right? Except with board games, you need to get to the multiplayer testing much sooner, so you can iterate on the prototype. So.
And what's next now? I mean, what's next for you? I know you are, of course, designing 15 games.
Well,
What-
I am. I'm actually sitting here building dice for my next game for Grey Fox Games. So I hope to have that ready for them now. I've promised it for years for them, but I ran into some design problems. Um, I have more upcoming games coming out from other publishers, like I told you about. Some space games. I love the sci-fi theme, and I'm closing off. I closed off a gangster game recently. I'm hoping a publisher would take on, and then I'll continue to do stuff. I'd like to do a sci-fi legacy game and a horror legacy game, but of course those are time consuming. And I have two young boys, and I want to do a game for them or inspired by the need, because I want to do an adventure game for kids where you can like a campaign game. I know there's mice and mystics out there, but I want to do something that they can play by themselves, where you don't need an adult to read
Any
the
help?
books. And I wanted to make it modular. We played Hero Quest, but once you're through the campaign, then it's kind of over, and also it requires an adult, right? So I have invented like a modular, not text-driven adventure game system. So I'd like to get that finished as well. So
So, so a
that's
lot going on.
yeah, that's just a few of them. I also made a World War II game, or a couple of World War II games actually. I hope to have, get published. Uh, that's more
What,
difficult because it's a real world war game, right? So it's not for all
yeah.
publishers, of course.
Where do you get the inspiration for your for the stories? Because I see that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I see that first you find a theme for your game, right? Or not?
It's
Or you have
it's
a list, or you have a list of themes, and then you have this idea for a mechanic, and then you put it there. How does this? I know it's a question everybody does, about what comes first, theme or mechanics, and it's, I know by personal experience that it's not always like crystal clear what comes first. But how does it work with you?
I think it's very they come almost simultaneously. Um, I usually because I've been a game designer for so long, I think in mechanics and systems all the time, to get that balancing going. But I have all the pop culture references ready. So as soon as I think about mechanics, I tie them up with whatever. And usually I start up with something generic, right? So it's just going to be fantasy or zombies or something like that, aliens or whatever. And then I tweak the theme to what fits the mechanics basically, or the other way around. I mean, for Champions of Midgard, for some reason I came up with the Vikings pretty early, but I just had them fight like generic monsters. But then when I thought about, I wanted that journey system because I really liked the idea of them going out exploring the world. So they have these journey events going on while at sea. Then it was pretty obvious that had to be Vikings going on missions to go to foreign countries and fight enemies. And then I didn't want it. I didn't want it. I want them to be like true classic heroes. So it's not about plundering and razing cities on the English shores or something like that. So I did the epic thing that was more like mythological against beasts. So, uh, but yeah, I get my inspiration comes from pop culture like any other. I mean, actually, for Police Precinct, I think I was inspired by computer games. That happens a lot to me, of course, because I'm also in that field. I was inspired by Police Quest, the old PC game, because you have all these different missions, even mundane tasks you need to go out and deal with. So it was Police Quest, the PC game, meets Battlestar Galactica, the board game. And so another way of making hybrids, right? That's usually how it works for me, mixing up some odd stuff, different stuff at least.
Do you? It's this. This is the last question, and it's just out of curiosity. Do you, when you design a game, for sure you have a visual idea on what your game, what you would like your game to be like, to look like.
Well, yeah. I always do that because I have it's thematic games, right? I don't have any requirements, but I like actually taking a bit of time to go out and Google images and find artwork, and then tweak it in Photoshop. So my prototypes always look nice because they're
Yeah, that
thematic.
was going to be my question. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
of course, it's not needed if you're just testing mechanics and you can deviate from the black and white graphics. But I always make them look good because it makes it more fun for me to test, and it also kind of tests out if this really feels like what I'm saying it is. So if I'm saying now this is a space cannon and you're using it to destroy aliens, if I can't show that visually, maybe the publishers would have a hard time as well. Not that I'm an artist, like I'm saying, and I'm stealing the
Yeah.
images for my prototype. I'm not doing it myself. I do some, but not much. Um, but it helps me a lot with the design and makes it way more fun for the testers to test. Um, so, and easier for the publishers to understand what I'm trying to do.
Do
Of
you
course,
think?
you can risk that the publishers apply some of it directly. That can also happen. That wouldn't be good.
Do you think it's important when you present a game to a publisher to have already some artwork done? I mean, even if it's like Google images and stuff, or do you think it's more from your experience? Do you think it's important to have some artwork on your prototype when you present it to a publisher, or it could be a black and white stuff, pencil, and
I believe it can be just black and white pencil, but I never tried it because it's not my style, so to speak. But I mean, publishers they have their professional game developers on board usually, so they can easily see in what way this could go. But if you have the visual for it, then of course you are already taking the next step, and they can see that. I guess it's a help for publishers as well. But you would have to ask them actually. I hope it is.
the last thing before we close this interview is I'm going to ask you to tell me a funny story or a curious one at least that happened during, it could be during the process of making a game or testing a game or even while presenting a game to a publisher.
Well, I can. Well, I can. When I made Police Precinct, um, I was really struggling with how I should show off the criminals because I used uh, actually red meeples um, to simulate danger. Um, and because I didn't want to use black because that could like simulate, of course, black people, and
Mhm.
especially now in these times that would be wrong. Even though black is often associated with danger, then not
Yeah.
as Meeple in a police game. I didn't want to do that. So I was really struggling how to use them, or which color to use to represent the criminals. But I ended up going with red, I think. And then the publisher, he didn't use Meeple anyway. He had the artist draw out actual figures, and they all looked like Hispanics. So, and people wrote at Board Game Geek, well, maybe it's because he's Danish, so he doesn't know that Hispanics is kind of offensive to call the criminals all Hispanic, even though it wasn't my doing. But it was kind of fun because I was really struggling how to not make a generic almost like racist comment.
Yeah.
So that was kind of funny. Another thing was when I worked on my World War II game, I made these small silhouettes of German tanks for dice. And my 8-year-old, who's very much into tanks, he just dropped by and saw my prototype, and he said, "Dad, why is there a British Cromwell tank on your dice if it's the enemy?" So he knew more about tanks than I did. So I actually had to go in and change the silhouette because he's my local 8-year-old expert on tanks. So always keep an 8-year-old around you when you design. He can be great for quality assurance.
You would be
So,
surprised. You probably wouldn't. And there is
oh,
someone.
there he is. That's him.
If people would be surprised on how useful kids can be while designing a game.
Yes, you get the honest, immediate responses for everything, right?
Exactly that. Right, Ola. Thank you so much for taking this time to be here at the Curious Box. Thanks
Thank you.
for all your knowledge and sharing this knowledge on games. Congratulations on all your games. They are wonderful. I'm
Thank you.
I'm really interested. I'm eager to know more about those 15 to 175 games that you have there
Yeah.
prepared to come out. Um, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. All right.
This was Ole Steiness here at the Curious Box. He created this wonderful game, Champions of Midgard, that you probably know, but go on and find out the other games he did. Uh, we'll be back with more interviews, on Fridays mostly in English, and on Monday, videos in Portuguese at the Curious Box. This is the new season, and we started it off with the right foot. Thanks a lot for being there. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive all the notifications about all these videos, all this good content. And of course, I'll be seeing you at a table close to you.